Hello everyone! Today, I'd like to go over a budget commander deck that I built around Minthara, Merciless Soul, an Orzhov commander from Commander Legends, Battle for Baldur's Gate. As usual, I've built this deck to cost less than $45 at the time of recording, using prices listed by Scryfall, including the cost of basic lands at 10 cents each, but not including the cost of shipping. Also, it is a glorious day as YouTube has finally decided that I'm actually a real person behind this mic, and my YouTube channel has been freed. Therefore, I can actually say, the link for the deck list will be in the description down below. I've updated all of the descriptions of my previous videos, and all future videos will have their links in their respective descriptions. Anyway, let's jump into the deck. So our commander is Minthara, Merciless Soul, a 2/2 elf cleric for 2 generic, a white and a black, which has Ward X, where X is the number of experience counters you have, and at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you get an experience counter. Additionally, creatures you control get +1/+0 for each experience counter you have. So there's a couple of directions that I see people taking when building a Minthara deck, predominantly focused on meeting the requirements for Minthara's second ability. You could either go for a blink flicker strategy, exiling and returning your creatures to the battlefield, or you could go for an Aristocrats strategy, with a heavy focus on sacrificing our own permanents for benefits. When I was doing my early testing and building, I personally found the Aristocrats style of deck to be more compelling, so that's the deck that I'm going to be going over today. So our strategy with this deck is going to start with low to the ground creatures that give us benefits when put into the graveyard, and we're going to look for some token generation, both creatures and artifacts such as treasure tokens, and that's because treasure tokens can be sacrificed to create mana, but they're also permanents, so when you sacrifice them, a permanent leaves the battlefield, and you don't have to sacrifice any of your creatures to access Minthara's second ability. We're also going to need sacrifice outlets so that we can actually sacrifice some of these creatures. We will also have a bunch of death triggers, making it so that when something dies on our field, we get a bunch of extra benefits. And, since, let's face it, only getting 1 counter per turn is kind of slow with Minthara, we're going to look at proliferating those counters so that we can get multiple experience counters per turn. It's also important to note that Minthara gives you, the player, the experience counters, and they aren't applied to Minthara herself, so that if Minthara gets dealt with, you keep those experience counters. They may not do anything until Minthara's back on the field, but exiling her, or having her put to the command zone, does not get rid of your counters. So, let's get into the 99 of this deck with Mana Acceleration. First up we have Marble Diamond and Charcoal Diamond, which tap for white and black respectively, but enter the battlefield tapped. We also have Mind Stone, which taps for generic mana, but can be sacrificed to draw a card, which is also handy because it's an easy sacrifice that we can use to get an experience counter from Minthara. We also have Orzhov Signet, which can take 1 mana of any color and turn it into a white and black mana. Ornithopter of Paradise, a flying mana dork that can give you 1 mana of any color. And finally, we have Felwar Stone and Arcane Signet, both of which will likely be able to tap for white or black whenever we need it. Now let's talk about some creatures that give us benefits when they die. First up, we have Crawling Chorus, Doom Traveler, and Hunted Witness, all of which are 1/1s that cost 1 white mana to cast, and when they die, they create various 1/1 token creatures, giving us something else to sacrifice later. Similarly, we have Martyr of the Dusk, Deathbloom Thallid, and Doom Dissenter, with Martyr of the Dusk and Deathbloom Thallid also giving us 1/1 token creatures, and Doom Dissenter giving us a 2/2 token creature. We also have Dire Fleet Hoarder, which gives us a treasure token when it dies, and Tattered Mummy, which makes each opponent lose 2 life when it dies. That all being said, to be certain that we're actually going to have something every turn to sacrifice, we're going to want to look into some consistent token generation. We can start with Horde Robber, which, when it deals a combat damage to a player, it'll create a treasure token. Mardu Strike Leader, which, whenever it attacks, it creates a 2/1 black warrior creature token. Undercity Scrounger, which can be tapped to create a treasure token, but activates only if a creature died in this turn. Also good to note that this can be done on an opponent's turn if you didn't end up sacrificing a creature on your own turn. We also have things like Ghoulish Procession, which, when 1 or more non-token creature dies, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. However, this ability only triggers once per turn. But good to note, this doesn't say creatures you control, so that means that this can happen on any person's turn, provided a non-token creature dies. There is also Blight Mound, which gives us a 1/1 black-green pest creature token whenever a non-token creature we control dies, and additionally, our attacking pests get +1/+0 and have Menace whenever they're attacking, along with the additional buffs that Minthara gives them. Similarly, we have Open the Graves, an enchantment that gives us a 2/2 black zombie creature token whenever a non-token creature we control dies. Ogre Slumlord, which gives us a 1/1 black rat creature token whenever a non-token creature we control dies, and additionally, the rats we control get Death Touch. We also have Life Insurance, which whenever a non-token creature dies, you lose a life and create a treasure token. Note that that's any non-token creature, not just our own. Additionally, it has Extort, which whenever we cast a spell, we can pay a white or a black, and if we do, each opponent loses a life and we gain that much life. And finally for this section we have Endrixar, Master Breeder, which whenever we cast a creature spell, we put X 1/1 black Thrall creature tokens onto the battlefield, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. And then if you control 7 or more Thralls, you sacrifice Endrixar. However, you'll be sacrificing these Thralls most likely, so you'll be able to keep Endrixar around for quite a while. Now most of the creatures and creature tokens that I've talked about can't sacrifice themselves, so we're going to need some sacrifice outlets. First up we have Viscera Seer, Dockside Chef, and Dreg Recycler, of which Viscera Seer lets you scry upon sacrificing a creature, Dockside Chef lets you draw a card if you sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and Dreg Recycler makes it so each opponent loses a life and you gain a life when you sacrifice an artifact or creature. There is also Ruthless Knave and Stronghold Assassin, with Ruthless Knave making 2 treasure tokens whenever you sacrifice a creature to it, and Stronghold Assassin letting you destroy a target non-black creature whenever you sacrifice a creature to it. We also have Illuminar Seraz, which, whenever we sacrifice a creature to it, it adds black mana equal to the sacrificed creature's mana value. Not so handy when you sacrifice a creature token, but you'd come in handy when we sacrifice some of our non-token creatures. We also have Shadowheart, Dark Justicar, which for 1 and a black lets us sacrifice another creature and draw X cards, where X was that creature's power. And finally some artifacts with Witch's Cauldron, Witch's Oven, and Relic Vial. Witch's Cauldron gives us 1 life and lets us draw a card when we sacrifice a creature to it. Witch's Oven gives us a food token, or if the sacrificed creature's toughness was 4 or greater, we create 2 food tokens. And Relic Vial lets us draw a card when we sacrifice a creature to it. However, as long as we control a cleric, Relic Vial also has, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. And the nice part is, Minthara is a cleric, so this will almost always be active. So now that we have a bunch of things to sacrifice, and a bunch of things to sacrifice them with, let's see if we can get some additional value out of these sacrifices. First up we have Phyrexian Vivisector, which lets us scry 1 whenever a creature we control dies. Dark Prophecy, which has us lose a life and draw a card whenever a creature we control dies. Agent of the Iron Throne, which gives our commander creatures an additional whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. Death Greeter, which, whenever another creature dies, you may gain a life. Note that this includes opponents' creatures. We also have Elas Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim, who has Death Touch, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life. We also have Blood Artist, Cruel Celebrant, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Blood Artist makes it so that when any creature dies, a target player loses 1 life and you gain a life. And Cruel Celebrant and Zulaport Cutthroat makes it so that when they, or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. And finally we have Bastion of Remembrance, an enchantment that, when it ETBs, lets you create a 1/1 human soldier creature token. And additionally, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So now that we have plenty of ways to get Minthara's experience counters, let's look into some proliferating effects so that we can accelerate how quickly we get experience counters. First up, we have Blightbelly Rat and Martyr for the Cause, which are 2 mana cost creatures that, when they die, let you proliferate. Admittedly, these could have been in the first chapter, but I felt Proliferate was important enough to have them separated. We also have Grateful Apparition, which is a 1/1 with flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you proliferate. We also have Whisper of the Dross, an instant for 1 black mana that gives target creature -1/-1 until the end of the turn, but more importantly, you proliferate. Similarly, we have Grim Affliction, which permanently gives a creature -1/-1, and then has you proliferate. There's also Unbounded Potential, an instant that lets us choose between putting a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, or proliferate, or if you decide to do the Entwine cost, you can do both. And finally, we have Drown in Ichor, a sorcery that gives a target creature -4/-4 until the end of the turn, and lets you proliferate. Now, some of the previous effects let us draw cards, but it'd be a good idea to have more draw since more cards in the hand means more options later. First up, we have Deadly Dispute, which has us first sacrifice an artifact or creature, and has us draw 2 cards and then create a treasure token. There's also Foreboding Fruit, which has a target player draw 2 cards, then lose 2 life. Additionally, it has Adamant. If at least 3 black mana were spent to cast the spell, you create a food token. We also have cards like Knight's Whisper, Sign in Blood, and Read the Bones. Knight's Whisper and Sign in Blood will have you draw 2 cards and then lose 2 life, and Read the Bones will have you scry 2, then draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. We also have a classic in Phyrexian Arena, which, at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose a life. There's also Underworld Connections, which lets you enchant a land, and it gives the land tap, pay 1 life, draw a card. And finally we have Greed, an enchantment that, after paying a black and 2 life, lets you draw a card, which you can do multiple times a turn if needed. Alright, moving towards the end of our 99, we still need to look at ways of protecting Minthara, since even though our experience counters go on us, they don't do anything unless Minthara is on the board. We're going to start with the classic with Swords to Plowshares, probably the quintessential white removal spell, useful for when somebody casts a scary creature. We also have Feign Death, an instant for 1 black mana that gives a target creature, when this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. There's also Graceful Reprieve, which, when target creature dies this turn, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. We also have some aura enchantments, such as Kaya's Ghost Form and Minion's Return, which, when the enchantment permanent dies, you return that card to the battlefield under your control. And finally we have Whisper Silk Cloak, an equipment that gives its equipped creature unblockable and Shroud, making it so it can't be the target of spells or abilities. And now that we've gotten through all of the spells in this deck, let's talk about our lands. First up, we have 3 scry lands with Zalfrin Void, Crystal Grotto, and Temple of Silence, all of which let you scry 1 when they ETB. We also have some lands that tap for both white and black. In Shine Shadow Snarl, try saying that one 5 times fast, it enters the battlefield tapped unless you reveal a Plains or Swamp card from your hand, at which point it can enter the battlefield untapped. And we also have Orzhov Basilica, which enters the battlefield tapped and has you return a land you control to its owner's hand when it enters the battlefield, but it taps for both white and black at the same time. We have a couple utility lands with Haunted Fengraf and Rogue's Passage. Haunted Fengraf taps for generic mana, but for 3 mana and sacrificing Haunted Fengraf, you can return a target creature at random from your graveyard to your hand. And for 4 mana, Rogue's Passage makes it so target creature can't be blocked this turn. We also have some cycling lands, which includes Secluded Steppe and Barren Moor, which tap for white and black respectively, and cycle for white and black respectively. Additionally, we have Drifting Meadow and Polluted Mire, which tap for white and black respectively, and either can be cycled for 2 generic mana. And finally, we'll fill out the rest of our deck with 9 plains and 15 swamps, since this deck has significantly more black pips than white pips. Now let's move on to that price. And as you can see here, this deck rings in at just under $45. As a reminder, this includes the cost of basic lands at 10 cents a piece, but does not include the cost of shipping. Now as a side thing, I've decided to put a couple potential upgrades you could put into this deck that aren't particularly expensive, and you may want to consider subbing into this deck. This includes Proper Burial, which in this deck can give you a lot of life gain throughout the game, Black Market, which can give you a huge amount of mana throughout the game, and Wrath of God, a board wipe in case things start getting really hairy. This can also work really well if you have something like Kaya's Ghost Form on Minthara, as she would be destroyed but returned immediately back to the battlefield, as that effect technically isn't regeneration. Regardless, if you'd like to build, play with, or adapt this deck, the link will be in the description down below. If you liked the video, consider giving it a like, and if you'd like more budget commander decks, consider dropping a sub. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.